So before the year 1914, Europe was honestly like a room full of gunpowder, just waiting for a single spark to set everything off. The big countries, which people called the great powers, really weren't friends at all. They were always in some kind of competition with each other, trying to prove who was the richest and the strongest. This competition created a ton of tension and fear across the continent. Everybody was watching everybody else, always wondering what the next move would be. It was a period of serious worry, where even a small problem could quickly turn into a huge, dangerous conflict that involved everyone. Many countries started building up their armies and navies, and this whole thing was called an arms race. Germany, for example, began building a bunch of new, really powerful warships. This made Great Britain super nervous. Britain already had the biggest navy in the world, and definitely wanted to keep it that way. So when they saw Germany's new ships, they took it as a real threat to their power and safety. This naval race basically made the two countries rivals, and honestly, they both spent huge amounts of money on more ships, just making things even more tense and dangerous for all of Europe. Another huge problem in Europe was nationalism. That's the strong belief that your own country is better than all others. In lots of places, people wanted to have their own independent nations. Like, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there were all these different groups, like the Serbs and Croats living together. But they didn't want to be ruled by Austria-Hungary. They dreamed of having their own countries. This wish for independence caused a lot of trouble inside the empire and with its neighbors. So at the start of the 20th century, Europe was honestly really divided. There were deep rivalries between the main powers, a dangerous race to build bigger armies and navies, and super strong feelings of nationalism that threatened to break up old empires. The continent wasn't at peace at all, but in a state of high alert. Everyone was kind of getting ready for a war they felt was sure to come. They just didn't know when or how it would finally begin. Each of the big countries in Europe had its own special hopes and fears. Germany was a new and powerful country, and it really wanted more respect. It also wanted to build a big empire, just like Britain and France already had. The leaders in Germany felt their nation deserved a bigger place in the world. A place in the sun, as they called it. To get this, they were totally willing to challenge the other great powers. And this ambition made other countries, especially France and Britain, super worried about how strong Germany was getting. France, on the other hand, had a totally different dream, and it came from a past defeat. Back in 1871, France lost a war against Germany, and had to give up a region called Alsace-Lorraine. The French people were really sad and angry about losing this land, and getting it back was basically the most important thing to them. This desire for revenge was a really strong feeling in France, so they were always looking for a chance to weaken Germany and win back their lost territory. It made a future war between them seem almost certain. Austria-Hungary was a very old and large empire, but honestly it was full of problems. It was made up of lots of different ethnic groups who didn't get along at all. The leaders of the empire were worried that it might fall apart. They were especially nervous about Serbia, which was a small but proud country to the south. Serbia encouraged the Slavic people inside Austria-Hungary to rebel. The Austro-Hungarian leaders saw Serbia as a huge threat to their survival and were looking for some way to stop its influence. Russia, which was the biggest country of all, also had really big dreams. The Russian leaders saw themselves as the protectors of all Slavic people, including the Serbs. That meant Russia was basically a natural enemy of Austria-Hungary. Russia also wanted more power in the Balkans, a region in southeastern Europe, and that put Russia directly in conflict with Austria-Hungary's goals. So, the rivalry between these two giant empires over the future of the Balkans was another major source of tension that could easily, lead to a really big war. The event that finally started the war happened on a sunny day, June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was visiting a city called Sarajevo. Sarajevo was in Bosnia, a region that Austria-Hungary had taken over. A lot of people there, especially the Serbs, were super unhappy with Austro-Hungarian rule. They wanted to be part of Serbia, not part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the Archduke's visit was seen by some as a real insult, and it was honestly a very dangerous day for him. A small group of young Serbian nationalists had a secret plan to kill the Archduke during his visit. They were part of a group called the Black Hand. On the morning of the visit, one of the assassins threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but the bomb bounced off the car and exploded under the car behind it, injuring several people. The Archduke was safe for the moment, After the failed attack, he decided to keep going with his visit to show he wasn't afraid of the danger. Later that day, after giving a speech at the town hall, the Archduke decided to visit the people who had been hurt by the bomb in the hospital, but his driver wasn't familiar with the new route and made a wrong turn. He drove down a small side street and then stopped the car to turn around. By an incredible and terrible coincidence, the car stopped right in front of one of the assassins, a young man named Gavrilo Princip. He honestly thought his chance was gone. Princip couldn't believe his luck. He saw the Archduke and his wife Sophie sitting in the open car just a few feet away from him. He pulled out his pistol and fired 2 shots. The first shot hit the Archduke in the neck, and the second shot hit his wife. They both died very quickly. This one single act of violence in a faraway city would soon set off a chain of events that would pull all of Europe, and then the world, into a terrible and devastating war. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the government of Austria-Hungary was, well, extremely angry. They saw this as a direct attack on their empire. They completely blamed the country of Serbia for the murder. They believed that the Serbian government had helped the assassins plan the attack. The leaders in Austria-Hungary decided they needed to punish Serbia very harshly. They wanted to use this chance to crush Serbia for good, so it could never cause trouble for their empire again. Before doing anything, Austria-Hungary wanted to make sure it had the support of its most powerful ally, Germany. The Austro-Hungarian leaders sent a message to the German Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II. They asked if Germany would support them if they went to war with Serbia. The Kaiser gave them what's now called a blank check. That meant Germany promised to support Austria-Hungary, no matter what it decided to do. This promise made the Austro-Hungarian leaders super confident and bold in their plans. With Germany's full support, Austria-Hungary sent a list of really harsh demands to Serbia. This list was called an ultimatum. The demands were so tough that it was almost impossible for Serbia to agree to all of them. For example, one demand was to allow Austro-Hungarian police to investigate the murder inside Serbia. That's something no independent country would ever accept. Austria-Hungary did this on purpose. They didn't want a peaceful solution. They wanted an excuse to declare war on Serbia. Serbia knew it couldn't fight Austria-Hungary alone, so it looked for help from its big protector, Russia. The Serbians agreed to most of the demands in the ultimatum, but they rejected a few of the harshest ones, just like Austria-Hungary expected. That was all the reason Austria-Hungary needed. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Serbia. The first step towards a massive European war had been taken, and honestly, there was no turning back. The war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia did not stay a small local conflict for long. This was because of a system of alliances in Europe. An alliance is a promise between countries to help each other if one of them is attacked. Before 1914, Europe was divided into 2 main alliance groups. The first was the Triple Alliance, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The second was the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Great Britain. These alliances were like a set of dominoes ready to fall. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia immediately got involved. Russia saw itself as the big brother and protector of Serbia and all Slavic peoples. The Russian army began to mobilize, which means it started to get its soldiers and equipment ready for war. The Russian leaders knew that this action would probably lead to a war with Germany, which was Austria-Hungary's ally. But they felt they had to support Serbia. This decision by Russia was the first step in making the conflict much bigger. Germany saw Russia's mobilization as a direct threat. According to their alliance, Germany had to help Austria-Hungary, so Germany declared war on Russia on August 1, 1914. Now, a war between 2 of the biggest powers in Europe had begun, but the chain reaction did not stop there. Germany knew that France was Russia's ally. The German leaders were sure that France would soon join the war to help Russia. So, to get ahead, Germany declared war on France just 2 days later, on August 3rd. In just a few days, a fight between Austria-Hungary and Serbia had pulled in Russia, Germany, and France. The alliance system, which was supposed to keep the peace by making countries afraid to attack each other, had done the exact opposite. It had created a situation where a small conflict automatically and quickly grew into a huge war. The great powers of Europe were now marching their armies against one another, and the continent was on the path to a disaster unlike any it had ever seen before. So, Germany had actually been planning for a big European war for many years. Their main military strategy was something called the Schlieffen Plan. This plan was named after the general who created it. Now, the biggest problem for Germany was that it was stuck between two enemies, France in the west and Russia in the east. Fighting a war on two fronts at the same time would be, well, extremely difficult. The Schlieffen Plan was supposed to solve this problem by defeating one enemy really quickly before the other one was fully ready to fight. The plan assumed that Russia, because of its huge size and pretty poor railways, would take a long time to mobilize its army, maybe 6 weeks or even longer. That gave Germany a small window of opportunity. The idea was to send most of the German army to the west and attack France first. The goal was to defeat France in a quick and decisive battle in less than 6 weeks. After knocking France out of the war, Germany could then move all of its soldiers by train to the east to fight the Russian army. To attack France quickly, the Schlieffen Plan had a very bold and risky part. The border between Germany and France was protected by a lot of strong French forts. Attacking these forts directly would be slow and really difficult. So the German plan was to go around them. They decided to march their army through the small, neutral country of Belgium. By going through Belgium, the German army could enter northern France, where the French defenses were much weaker, and then circle around to capture Paris. This plan was pretty clever from a military point of view, but it had one major political problem. Belgium was a neutral country. That meant it had promised not to take sides in any war, and the other major powers, including Britain and Germany itself, had promised to respect its neutrality. The German generals knew that invading Belgium was against international law, but honestly they believed that winning the war quickly was more important than anything else. So, they were willing to take the risk. When Germany decided to put the Schlieffen Plan into action, it first asked Belgium for permission to march its army through the country. The small nation of Belgium bravely refused. The Belgians just did not want to be part of a war between their powerful neighbors. But Germany, well, they did not take no for an answer. On August 4, 1914, the German army invaded Belgium anyway. The German generals expected to march through Belgium easily, but the small Belgian army fought back hard and actually slowed down the German advance. The invasion of neutral Belgium shocked the world. It was a clear violation of international law and treaties. This action had a huge impact in Great Britain. For a long time, Britain had tried to stay out of Europe's problems, but Britain had a very old treaty from 1839 that promised to protect Belgium's neutrality. The British government also worried that if Germany controlled Belgium and the French coast, it would be a direct threat to Britain's own security and its powerful navy. The British government sent an ultimatum to Germany, demanding that Germany pull its troops out of Belgium immediately. Germany refused. The German chancellor famously called the treaty protecting Belgium just a scrap of paper. For Britain, this was the final straw. The invasion of a small, defenseless neutral country was something the British public and leaders just could not accept. They felt they had a moral duty to act, as well as a strategic need to stop German aggression. So on the night of August 4, 1914, after Germany's deadline passed, Great Britain declared war on Germany. With this decision, the last of the great European powers had joined the conflict. The war, which had started in the Balkans, was now a true world war. The British Empire, with its vast resources and soldiers from all over the globe, was now fighting alongside France and Russia against Germany and Austria-Hungary. The stage was set for a long and terrible conflict. In the first few weeks of the war, the German army moved quickly through Belgium and into France, just as the Schlieffen Plan had intended. The French and British armies were pushed back towards Paris. It really looked like Germany might win a quick victory, but in September 1914 at the Battle of the Marne, the Allied armies managed to stop the German advance. They found a gap in the German lines and forced the German army to retreat. This battle saved Paris and ended Germany's dream of a fast war. After the Battle of the Marne, both sides tried to get around the side of the other army in what was called the Race to the Sea. Each army tried to move north towards the coast to outflank the enemy, but they always met the other army and were stopped. Soon a long line of soldiers stretched all the way from the Swiss border in the south to the North Sea coast in the north. Neither side could advance, and neither side could go around the other. A stalemate had begun. To protect themselves from the enemy's machine guns and artillery shells, soldiers on both sides began to dig into the ground. They created a huge and complex system of trenches. These trenches were long, deep ditches where the soldiers lived, ate, and slept. The area between the two enemy trench lines was called no man's land. It was a dangerous, empty place covered in mud, barbed wire, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. This new type of fighting, called trench warfare, would define the Western Front for the next 4 years. Life in the trenches was honestly a nightmare. The soldiers lived in constant fear of death from shelling or a sniper's bullet. The trenches were often filled with deep mud and dirty water, which caused diseases like trench foot. Huge rats were everywhere, feeding on leftover food and dead bodies. The conditions were terrible, and the fighting was brutal. To attack, soldiers had to climb out of their trench and run across no man's land towards the enemy, usually into a storm of machine gun fire. Millions of men would die in these terrible conditions. When the war started in Europe in 1914, the United States of America decided to stay out of it. The President of the United States at the time was Woodrow Wilson. He declared that America would be neutral. This meant that the United States would not take sides or join the fighting. Most Americans agreed with this decision. They saw the war as a European problem, a distant conflict between old empires that had nothing to do with them. The Atlantic Ocean separated them from the chaos, and they wanted to keep it that way. Many Americans had family roots in the countries that were now at war. There was a large population of German Americans who naturally felt some sympathy for Germany. There were also many Irish Americans who strongly disliked Great Britain and did not want to help them. At the same time, many other Americans felt a connection to Britain and France because of shared language, history, and democratic ideas. So, public opinion in the United States was very divided at the beginning of the war. However, as the war went on, American opinions began to slowly change. The news coming from Europe had a big influence. Reports of German atrocities in Belgium where they had burned towns and killed civilians created a very negative image of Germany. Allied propaganda was very effective at painting the Germans as brutal and aggressive. This started to turn more and more Americans against the Central Powers. They began to see the war not just as a European quarrel, but as a fight for civilization and democracy. Despite the changing public mood, President Wilson's main goal was to keep America out of the war and to try to be a peacemaker. The United States continued to trade with both sides, though the British naval blockade made it much harder to trade with Germany. For the first few years of the conflict, America remained on the sidelines, watching the terrible events unfold from across the ocean. It would take more time and more provocations before the United States would finally be drawn into the Great War.